Run, Try, Bike, and Everyday Athlete community. Welcome to our Fireside Chat on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. This is our 150th. That's right, you heard it, 150th episode. And I'm excited to chat with not just our guests, but our guests, as you can see. Today, we have a special roundtable for you featuring the brilliant minds of Dr. Aaron Ayala from Scotty Sports Psychology, Dr. Joanne Villard from Absolute Fitness Performance, Landon Hildebrand from Approach Psychology, and Pat Spencer from Getting Your Mind in Gear. Aaron, Joanne, and Pat have both been on our Fireside Chat before and are longtime contributors of sports psychology readings on our platform. Jason interviewed Landon back in December on the topic of DNFs, which was an amazing article that came out on Christmas Day, and it's one of our topics today. A little bit housekeeping before we get started. The Fireside Chat is one of 9 amazing shows on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. So like, subscribe, rate, and review to support our amazing creators. Let's get this thing rolling. I have an icebreaker question for everybody, but before I jump into that, I'm going to start on the top left with Dr. Aaron. Ask how you're doing.
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. The cold snap broke here in Minnesota, so I am appreciating the warmer temps and the ability to run outside instead of on the treadmill.
Awesome. Joanne, Dr. Joanne, how are you doing?
Good. Very good. Thanks for having me here tonight. I'm excited to talk with everyone.
Yeah, it feels like very recently. Wasn't it like just last month we had you on the
A couple
Fireside
weeks
Chat?
ago. Yeah. Yep.
Everybody, this is Joanne's third time being on the Fireside Chat. Again, longtime contributor and super excited to have her on the show again. If you're reading a sports psychology article in our digital magazine, chances are 9 out of 10 times it was written by Dr. Joanne. And there are also some amazing contributions on our website as well, which we will link after the show. Landon, how are you doing?
I'm doing great as well. Like Dr. Aaron up here in Canada, the cold snap is finally gone. So I'm just happy to run outside again for the first time in like a month. Feels great.
Awesome. And I'm so glad to hear that the cold snap is breaking for everybody. That is amazing to hear. Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Quite honestly, a little bit tired. I just got back from a really awesome vacation. I went scuba diving in Palau, and just got back Sunday night. And then I picked up my bike from getting tuned up because I brought it in to get tuned up while I was gone. So I'm raring to go because it's also warm here in New Jersey now. So all of us will be outside in our own individual states and provinces and whatnot.
Wait a minute. You're in New Jersey, Dr. Joanne. Are you also in New Jersey?
I am also in New Jersey. Yeah.
Awesome. Where in Jersey are you?
Small world, small state.
Yeah. What about you?
I'm in Somerset. I'm sorry, I missed where you said you were at.
Near Atlantic City.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm in Somerset, New Brunswick area.
Oh, very nice. Okay. Awesome.
This is so cool. You know how they say, like, how they have the 4 out of 5, like, dentist thing approved this? 2 out of 4 of our sports psychologists here are from New Jersey.
Yep, which means you'll get really honest answers.
That is
hopefully
true.
No cursing thrown in. You just don't know.
See, I've started to understand that more as I've started working with Jason, who is a hardcore New Yorker.
Okay.
As somebody who's grown up on the West Coast, I get it a lot more now.
Mm-hmm.
So before we jump into the real deep questions on the show, we talked a bit about this in the green room, but starting with you, Dr. Aaron, this is our icebreaker question. Your pregame ritual, if your sports psychology approach manifested as one.
So in other words, what I say, what I tell or suggest others to do, but may or may not myself, or what I actually do.
Yes. So like,
Okay.
So it could be like, it could be words you actually would say to yourself or someone else. Or it could be an actual ritual like the chalk toss that LeBron does or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. I'm really, really big on process goals. And I, for myself and my athletes. So that is something that definitely aligns. And so before every race, I'll sit down and I'll look through and I'll do the long races. So like 50K runs, or in this case, like 200-mile gravel races. So we're talking hours. And so I know the importance of not focusing on the outcome or the times, because who knows what's going to happen in 50K or 200 miles. So I'll sit down beforehand, and that's part of my routine. I'll map out my nutrition, and then I'll figure out goals for each segment, what to expect on the segments. And then I'll figure out at what point am I probably going to hit the infamous pain cave. And then what's the mantra that I want to use or the value that I want to bring in. So things that I don't do that I wish I would do more often: meditation, mindfulness, visualization, like beforehand, because we know how good that is. But it's hard on race day. It's so busy, which is arguably the need for us to do it more.
That makes sense.
Oh, and sorry, one more. I have pancakes every morning before my races, and that's really important because we appreciate food here at Run Try Bike.
We do appreciate food here at Run Try Bike, and I'm also a very I've grown to become a process oriented person, so I love definitely more of a planner now. But I love that it was like process and then pancakes.
Yep, process, pancakes.
Equally important. Oh, that should be it right there. Process and pancakes. Dr. Joanne, what about you?
So I do not do ultras, but marathons, half marathons, those are usually my race lengths. So for me, chunking the race, I guess focusing on the process is a very important piece also. I'm very grounded in mindfulness. So I use a lot of breath work strategies, try to do deep breathing. Beforehand, I'll analyze what can I control, what can I control going into it, and strategize as best I can. Usually something will happen and that goes out the window very quickly, because something that I didn't plan for maybe all of a sudden appears, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't plan ahead for this one. So I usually wear hair bands around my wrist. And I will snap them at myself to help me kind of tune back in and use it kind of as like an anchor in the moment, to remind myself to breathe, to remind myself to be as present as I can, and just enjoy it, because you get to do this. You get to enjoy it.
Yeah, that cannot be stated enough that you get to be out there. But I just love the mindfulness approach, and I think it's one of the things I just love about sports is being able to be present like that. Landon, what about you?
Yeah, this is definitely a case of do what I say, not necessarily what I do. Because in reality, I know that I'm just going to become overly social in my anxiety at a start line, particularly of ultras. I'm going to say hello to everyone, and I'm going to forget to start my watch until I'm actually crossing the start line. But one thing I try to get athletes to focus on is very similar to what's already been shared, is those micro goals that you can control in the moment. So what's the plan for fueling throughout the race? What's the plan for their mindset, their emotional goals as well? That's an area that I really focus on with athletes is, okay, what is the goal for the emotions that we want to be aiming towards and digging our way towards it in races? And, it's always joy, happiness, growth, those type of things that I'm really trying to encourage them towards. And then that final piece is don't relying on the data, but the data of self, trusting in self. That's one that I think is, been the most powerful for my athletes, but I can definitely say when I finally remember it, leg 3 of 100K or something like that, that's where I finally remember, oh yeah, trust yourself. You know how to do this.
Yeah, I think it's something that we all forget sometimes. And I appreciate your vulnerability about it, because I think it helps people to know that even sports psychology experts, it gets the best of us, so that vulnerability is so important, and I appreciate it. Pat, what about you?
So when I'm standing there on the start line, kind of straddling my bike, ready to go, when I'm nervous as hell, and I try to be mindful. I try to focus on the present moment. I try to not even think about what's going to happen when I cross the start line, but it's kind of like, right, what's the here and the now? Some of my techniques I use, I call blue bike, which is I look around and I look for all the blue bikes. And then I look for all the red bikes, and then all the yellow bikes, or who's wearing an orange helmet. I really try to stay focused on right here, right now, and focused on my breath. And then once I can kind of calm myself just a bit, like go from like a a level 8 down to like a level 6, maybe in the anxiety. I'll then start thinking about, okay, well, let's make sure you take a drink right now. Don't forget to have the pre-race gel. This would be a really good time for the pre-race gel or the pre-race. I love payday bars. Everybody, Jason knows that. My pre-race payday bar. But again, I try to focus just right here and now. I've done a lot of mental prep the day before. Like I'll think about the processes the day before. I'm thinking about my nutrition. I'm planning that out. I'm making sure it's on my bike and ready to go. But in that moment, I really try to practice being in the moment. And then also telling myself, I know I'm nervous. I know I'm anxious, and it's okay. And once I start pedaling, the anxiety is going to start to melt away. So that's my pre-race routine.
I think I think I'm such a big person on pre-race jitters and like just getting started and getting rolling. I also just love how this is only the icebreaker question, and I can hear everyone's perspectives on like, I hear the things that sound similar, like being present, staying in the moment, and a lot of key topics. But I can also feel everybody's perspectives, not only from their background in sports psychology, but their life and also the sports that they're doing. Before we move on to the next question, like you, Pat, and you, Dr. Aaron, you're both cyclists. So I'm curious to hear your take, Dr. Aaron, on like Pat's approach of like blue bikes and red bikes, and if you have a similar approach to that.
Yeah, it's so funny because I call it counting colors. And so I do the same thing, but it's not specific to bikes. And I'll also assign that as a piece of homework for my athletes on their long rides or their long runs. And so I'll say, okay, find 5 things that are red, 5 things that are orange, 5 yellow, 5 green, 5 blue, and good luck with purple because it's hard to find outside. So especially this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere. So that's a really cool approach. I'm a really big fan of too for kind of the mindfulness. I use the acronym WIN, ironically, what's important now. And so when my mind starts racing or I start getting distracted or the what ifs start or I kind of start future forecasting, I ask myself what's important now. And it's usually, keep the pressure on the pedals, keep pedaling, keep moving forward and have a snack. Because you have to stay on top of your nutrition and hydration, especially for the longer stuff. So that's my approach.
Yeah, I have to agree with snacks and just staying on top of I really like that acronym. So I'm going to start using
Yeah, I
that.
know. I don't like the acronym because it's about winning, and I'm not about winning as a sports psychologist. I'm about the process, but it works well for what's important now.
It reminds me of like people who have that misconception that failure is a bad thing, but fail is first attempt in learning.
Yes.
So it kind of reminds me of that.
Yep, exactly.
So I'm going to start with our first question. I'm going to start with you, Pat, on this, and then work in the opposite direction. I think this is a very important question for all endurance athletes, but I'm curious to hear everyone's take on it. Why is your why so powerful? Why is it so important?
Wow, that's like a really huge question. And the why is so powerful. I mean, for many reasons, but the one I often kind of focus on is that's what keeps us going when we get into, I call them the dark times or the pain cave, or, the why is what keeps you going. Because it is very easy to, for me to stop pedaling and be like, all right, I'm done. But if I can focus on, I'm out here, I don't do the 200s like Dr. Aaron does. I do the 100s, but it's still, you hit that time where you start questioning, why in the heck am I out here in a thunderstorm? I've been out there in Unbound in the middle of a thunderstorm. I'm like, I'm waiting for Dorothy on her and with Toto to come flying by.
We were probably in that same storm together and not realizing it because I know exactly what.
Yeah,
my phone like literally died.
But it's like, but when you know your why, when you're like, I'm out here, my why is usually because I want to challenge myself and see how far I can push my body is one of my whys. And my other why is I want to enjoy nature and I want to enjoy all that nature has. And what better way to enjoy nature than endurance sports? So that's my why. And the why keeps me going when the things get rough. The why also will get you off the couch when it's cold The why will get you on the treadmill for the runners. The why will get us on the trainer. I mean, I seen Dr. Aaron on Instagram post about 5-hour trainer rides. I'm like, goodness gracious, she must have a great why. Because that's what the why does. The why lights a match. It gives us some of that motivation. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I don't think I'm a fan of the trainer rides. I did one during COVID that was like 4 or 5 hours long, and I don't know how you guys do it. My butt hurts on the bike. But, Landon, what about you? Why do you believe that your why is so powerful?
I think one of the things with the why that's so important is how our why evolves over time. And I'll speak for myself and how that's also a theme with the athletes I work with a lot of times. And maybe to tell you a little bit about myself to start off is I actually don't call myself a sports psychologist, only because it's not a recognized term in Alberta where we live, but also because I found my way into it accidentally as an athlete who was also a psychologist. And then kind of have done courses and stuff to understand that piece. But for me, I was originally drawn to ultras specifically because I think I tricked myself into thinking I wasn't seeking validation. I could do these things. That makes me tough. That makes me hard. And I tricked myself into thinking it was something else. But the reality is I definitely got into ultras because I wanted to validate my toughness. And so I think why whys are so important is because whys are not what we're seeking at a podium. Whys are what we're hoping to experience in the entire process, through the training, through the dark times, through the connections we make, through the shoes we choose, everything, right? Because if we're trying to get that validation, it doesn't matter where we sit on the podium, we're going to invalidate that experience and those emotions. So my why is always about curiosity, which is something I really try to build up in athletes as well, is okay, aren't you curious what your why is going to be, how you're going to be motivated to discover that throughout?
Yeah, can't be stated enough. I'm glad you made that point about your why evolving over time. I think it's a dynamic thing. And I think about the Ohm who started ultra running and even started running almost 7 years ago in April. And that why is not the same why that it is today. But it's a beautiful thing. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Dr. Joanne, what about you?
Sure. So I definitely echo what was just saying about the involvement. And I believe in our fireside chat last time we were talking about the involvement and can your why change? Like how does that work? For myself personally, I was a former collegiate field hockey athlete. When I graduated college, I was like, what do I do now? And I was not a runner. So I was like, I'm going to go run. I ran like 3 miles. I'm like, I'm signing up for a marathon. And everyone was like, really? I'm like, yup. And at that point in time, it was great. I found like team in training, made some friends, a good community, all that. But definitely, as my life changed, got married, I have 4 children, they're really busy. I ebb and flow, and sometimes it's frustrating, but that's when I have to remind myself. And this is something I also, when I work with athletes and performers, I share the same piece when we talk about our why. Like, your why is intrinsic and it's for you, it's for nobody else. It's your passion, it's your purpose, it's the dedication that you're providing to you. And once you have a why established, it's not written in stone. It can change. We can give ourselves the grace that life happens. We need to be able to adapt. Because even if you think about like leadership, one of the biggest elements of being a good leader is to be able to cope with change. So for ourselves, giving ourselves permission to cope with change is also really important in that adaptability piece. But, when that why is there, it helps you make your decisions and decide like, what race do I want to sign up for, or what's right for me right now in the season that I'm in my life. It helps you not only make those decisions, but establish goals and focus on the process, focus on the outcome, and really be that like Northern Star kind of philosophy, to guide you along the way. But at the end of the day, it's all for you. It's all for you.
That's such a good point about it all being for you. And I like the use of those words, giving yourself permission. I think that's so important, and also just hearing the way that all these terms are the terms that you all are using from your own perspectives reminds me of the power of words, and how important that is.
Mhm.
Dr. Aaron, what about you?
Yeah, I echo everything that's been said so far, and I think of the why as like that's your undercurrent, that's your foundation, and as Dr. Joanne noted, like that's all you. No one can take it away from you. And the other thing that I think is important to note is how often athletes can unintentionally start chasing feelings. Like feelings of pride, of satisfaction, of pain, of trying, like we're really big on channeling our emotions like through sport, and emotions are a roller coaster and we don't have control over them and they're wildly unpredictable, and so why would we try to base our goals off of something that's so unpredictable? Like it's not sustainable. And when we come to our why, that's the undercurrent, that's the foundation. And so when things get rocky, like Pat noted, and Landon, it's like being able to kind of look back to that. And then that's your moral compass or the North Star, right? So that's going to be more stable and steady for you. And for athletes who want sustainable performance, sustainable mental health, we need a foundation, which means routines, stability. And then we can add the different adventures through races and traveling, and et cetera. But the why needs to be pretty stable, and it will kind of morph over time. Yeah, like the Aaron, my why from 15 years ago, very different. But that's the cool part about it, is my why initially was more kind of superficial, and then it got deeper and deeper, and it felt like it fit better every year thereafter, which is the cool part.
It's such a beautiful thing. Like, um, oh man, just thinking about your why from that first point on, which for me was mental health reasons, and
Mhm.
now it's turned into like just so many different reasons, and just evolves and grows, and you ebb and flow, and like so many different things, and so it's just incredible hearing everyone's perspectives on the whys. So now I want to talk about something that's very important in today's day and age that I've had individual conversations on with everybody, most recently Joanne. But social media in today's day and age, very important. Obviously, the biggest thing is the comparison. Dr. Joanne made a great quote about this when we were on the chat last month, where she says, once you start getting into that comparison game, look out, like almost like gloves are off, things can get crazy. So I just want to ask. Starting with you, Landon. How do you navigate in this space with your athletes and yourself? What social media brings into this space? It's obviously got its good and its bad, but comparison is always going to be a big thing on social media. So I'm curious as to hear your perspectives on that, starting with you, Landon.
Yeah, I think this is something I end up talking about with all of my clients, especially these days. And that's how we've trained ourselves into the comparison game. The dopamine production of the new and novel stimuli of infinite scroll causes us to believe we're going to be rewarded if we keep doing this thing, right? And it's not actually pleasurable, but we think it might be because of that dopamine bloom we get, right? And so what's really important is how can we control those pieces? For a lot of folks, social media is a way of life. I run a company. My wife and I own our company together. We have to have a social media presence. A lot of the athletes I work with also have to have a social media presence. If they're coaches, they definitely have to have one. And so the way that we manage it is by identifying what's actually happening there, why it begins to drag us in, and why it keeps like bruising us so much. But then it's okay. How can we manage that? And the easiest way to manage it is to pretend it's 2007 again. I get everyone to move back to desktop. I don't have social media on my phone anymore. I just have it on my desktop. And what it does is it stops the reward cycle, that learning to think it's a reward cycle, and allows us to reevaluate our relationship with it while still mostly being able to interact at a much more controlled level. So it's like, oh, this actually works. 2007 Facebook was really, really fun. It was how I just found out who actually graduated from high school or who was married. It's how I invited everyone to my wedding because I didn't have addresses. I'm a dude. I don't carry addresses. And so having that disconnect has been really helpful for a lot of my athletes.
Yeah, I like the and I have to do it for myself as well, but I like the concept of setting boundaries for yourself with that social media.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I personally do it myself and find myself catching myself like going for a reel or something and thinking, now, wow, why am I doing this? What's stressing me out enough that I'm doing this? Um, so, Joanne, what about you? What's your take on social media and navigating social media?
Yeah. I wish would take it off my phone. But no, it is on my it is on my phone. I actually don't use social media on my desktop, which is interesting to see a difference there. But yeah, I agree with the dopamine hit, and it feels good. I mean, when you get the likes, when you get the follows, when people are resharing, it sort of gives you that rush. But then when it's crickets or when it's quiet, I even find myself being like, huh, was that not good content? Did nobody really like what I just put out there? So I mean, that scrolling piece, that mindlessness of what we're doing when I think some people call it like doom scrolling, right? Where all of a sudden it's like 30 minutes or an hour has passed and you're like, I don't even know what I've been doing. I don't even know what I've been watching, but now I'm feeling different. You could be starting to feel like anxious or sad or even happy or whatever it might be, but it's hard to always pinpoint what was the trigger. But it can lead to that comparison piece that we talked about in that fireside chat last month. So one strategy I have used is putting time limits on my phone, where I'll go into the settings and put like a specific amount of time per day I'm allowed to use, social media apps, and then it just shuts down. And I, of course, can grant myself permission to extend it, but it is kind of interesting because some days I won't even come close to that time limit, and other days I'm like, it's over already. Like that's it, But that is something I find for myself is an effective strategy.
It does really make you. I have that same permissions on my phone too, on my iPhone, and really does make you second guess, like, why am I logging back on this? Why am I doing this? But you're right. There are some days, given the work that we do, there are some days I'm like, wow, I haven't been on social media all day. And then there's other days it's 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, wow, I'm already done with my hour. What is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Aaron, what about you?
Yeah, similar. I turn off push notifications, especially during the day. I have my phone on the different, like I have a work mode and a sleep mode. And frankly, it's rare that it's not on either one of those things just because the noise is too distracting for me. And then I also have it so that the little red like number doesn't show up to tempt me. So that makes it a lot kind of cleaner, and I'm less likely to get distracted, and I'm more intentional with how I'm using it. I've been open about this before. I only follow, so like on Strava, I only follow my dad, who's in his 70s, who loves biking, and my mother-in-law. That's it. Other people can follow me, but I don't want to get sucked into that comparison trap, and looking at the volume and the workouts that other people are doing, and because that's not helpful for me. So that's really big for me with the social media for Strava. I'm also just intentional about, like, if I want to doom scroll, then I'm going to do it intentionally. And so it's like, okay, Aaron, you've got 20 minutes. If you want to scroll, like, do your thing, but then you're done. And then I got this tip from actually one of the athletes I work with. She caught herself and was like, just paused and noticed it in the moment. I was like, what am I looking for? And so I'll ask myself that question when I catch myself, because sometimes I am looking for something specific and then I get distracted because it's social media. And that's helpful to just be more intentional with it.
Yeah, I think that's somewhere where I've definitely gotten with it too. I'm asking myself, what am I looking for? But that's a good point that you made about like allotting yourself that time to doom scroll because that's something you want to do. And sometimes I am looking for a new Pepe King prawn like Madonna meme,
Yeah, sometimes we just need memes and really silly reels or cute puppy videos. Like there's nothing wrong with that. And so it's, yeah, because we also can't, I don't know, there can be this misconception of like, oh, don't do any of it, and there's this kind of moral superiority for people who don't use it because they've got great self-discipline, and that can also turn into kind of this like toxic productivity success type of line of thinking. Like, we're also human and we like puppy videos, like let us watch them. So it's just being real about it.
Yeah, your intentions are everything with that. I totally agree. And also, I think I can guarantee I'm the only person sending Dr. Erin pictures of her own dog back to herself.
It is hilarious. It's amazing in the best moments. Yeah.
What about you?
Oh, I wish I had a really awesome answer, and I wish I could say I stay off social media. I don't. I'm one of the doom scrollers. But in addition to work with athletes, I also am a private practice therapist, and I work a lot with teenagers and college students. So I spend a lot of time talking about social media with clients. And something I often do is kind of, Dr. Erin just touched on it. I believe Joanne touched on it, which is, let's look at what you're looking for in this moment. And then when they're doing the comparison, I mean, there's the quote from, I forget who, but, comparison is the thief of joy. College kids don't like that quote, by the way. But I will have them look at whatever it is, the person that they're comparing themselves to. Let's say it's a triathlete and they're comparing themselves to Lucy Charles Barkley. She's an amazing athlete, right? And somebody might come in and say, well, she's doing this differently than me, or doing that, or look at how good she looks in this. I'll have them actually take a step back and let's examine it. Let's examine Lucy Charles Barkley's life compared to your life. What's the life of a pro triathlete versus an age grouper? What does she have access to that you don't have access to? And also, what do you think is happening in the split second before that picture was taken and the split second after that picture was taken? So really trying to do a bit of education, a bit of some reality testing, a bit of some creating some space. But also sometimes we'll sit with that comparison. Okay, so this person looks prettier than you, let's just say. What does that mean to you? Why is that important to you? What messages are there? And then go back to your doom scrolling if that's what you need. But it's like, I really try to help somebody pause and take just a moment and look at what's their reaction, what's their story, and what story can they tell about the other person on the other end of that reel, if you will. So.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with that. And I love the usage of the word like pause and intention. I feel like are the big words here. So I was going to move on to the next question, but being totally honest, did I ask you that social media question yet, Landon?
Yeah, you did. You started with me.
Oh man, Fireside Chat 101, everybody. 150 episodes later. And which brings me into a good segue for our next question, approaching DNFs and failure. I'm going to start with you on this one, Landon. There's an article that you did with Jason on DNFs. So I'm going to ask you about what your approach is to DNFs and by extension failure for yourself and your clients.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't by extension them of like, I don't necessarily always connect those two. Or at least I don't always put failure doesn't mean the same thing as it's assumed oftentimes. And so for myself, a DNF is always an opportunity, not just because I'm some positive psychology BS person. That's, if anyone actually knows my personality, that's the furthest thing from it. But it's more of, okay, this thing that we're doing is a puzzle. It doesn't matter how prepared we are, how trained we are. It's just too big, especially in ultras or any endurance sport. There's too many variables at play. And so to get people to go back to the puzzle of like, okay, what can we figure out next time? Like, what can we apply to this? And that's really been the approach I take. Now, at the same time, I do have to acknowledge that like there's still I feel decimated afterwards. I feel awful of, like, man, I don't like the way that turned out. I'm sad. I'm embarrassed. I feel ashamed. All those emotions are there. But the more familiar I've become with the DNF, the more I actually look to those things, it's like, okay, this is just part of like, I got to climb a hill in a race. I got to go through these emotions. I'm going to experience them. I'm going to embrace them, and I'm going to learn from them. And I think that's been a huge thing. And walking with some of my clients through that process, whether it's an athlete or an entrepreneur or a business leader or whatnot, there's just so much we can gain from all those pieces that we go through.
Yeah, I agree. And as an ultra runner myself, like, I mean, I agree. Like, sometimes you have to, I would say every time for all my 5 DNFs, I've had to sit with it and feel those emotions. And even when
Yeah.
I still talk about them, I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, make space for it and actually feel disappointed. It's sad. You just spend a lot of training, a lot of money, and a lot of time away from family, work, whatever, all those commitments. Allow yourself to feel those things. It's only normal.
Absolutely. Dr. Aaron, what about you? Your approach to DNFs and failure?
Yeah, I think really similar. It's like as difficult and annoying and frustrating as it is, the the messy middle of sitting with your feelings, like that's where the growth is. And I'm similar to Landon. Like I was like, I'm going to be a researcher. I'm going to be a professor. Like I'm not going to be a therapist. I never saw myself going into private practice, and here I am. And so I've learned to like appreciate that. But it means being able to kind of, rumble with that vulnerability and kind of sit with my shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here, but I just did. So it's like being able to get real with myself when needed. And then I think the other thing is the reflection and knowing the difference between ruminating and reflecting. Because if you're ruminating, you're stuck in the past and it's like shoulda, coulda, woulda. There's this pattern, perfectionists are notorious for this, called counterfactual thinking. If only I would have dot dot dot. If only dot dot, then I would have, right? That's a super, like, we get sucked into that cycle really easily. And usually it's not helpful unless we look at next time I can dot dot dot. So you've got to make sure that you make room for that reflection part afterwards, because otherwise you're just beating yourself up and then you're not actually learning anything from it because you're sitting in shame. And we don't learn when we're ashamed. So that's another kind of thing that's really important about the DNF piece, is reflect on the experience, and that's what allows you to grow. Beating yourself up won't help you grow.
I like ruminating versus reflecting. I think there was a certain point after my last DNF where I got to the point and I said, okay, I've spent about the last 24 hours, 48 hours thinking about like the what ifs, the what ifs. When does I think it has stopped serving me at this point, and it's time to move forward. So I like the differentiation of those things. Joanne, what about you?
So I think both of those responses were excellent, and definitely I think we have sort of overlapping thoughts there. But the emotions, they sting when you fail, or when you don't achieve what you're trying to do, or when you DNF. And actually the other day in class, I'm a college professor, and we were talking about this topic, and I said, raise your hand if you've ever failed. And students were like, bam, like raising the hand. I said, raise your hand if you failed today. And you could see people like, right? But then they all started looking around, and it was like, oh, you failed today? Cool, I failed today, right? And then the hands started getting stronger as they raised. So I think failure in a way can also like normalize us, because it's a shared experience of people who have, like, when you find somebody else who has failed at something that you've attempted to do, it helps create that sense of community with somebody else, like that sense of belonging. Like, okay, how did you get out of it? Because then you don't feel as isolated and alone. Like, oh, it's just me that DNF'd, or just me that failed at this thing I'm trying to accomplish right now. But when we are able to reflect afterwards, like after the emotions have decompressed, and we can look at things objectively, like that's a beautiful learning space to be able to truly just evaluate. And I always tell my athletes, like, let's be strategic with it, kind of like bouncing off of what was just said, like ruminating versus reflecting. But let's strategize. How are we going to approach it? Is it differently next time, or are we going to approach it the same way but make minor adjustments along the way, and give it a try. It might work in our favor, and maybe we will fail again, but how can we really just use that as the process to connect with ourselves more, learn more about ourselves, and continue chasing that dream or that goal that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially about like piggybacking on the ruminating and reflecting, but also the sense of community that comes with it. Because I think like so often, I think we fail at something and we think that we're alone in failing at it. So that's such a powerful activity to say how many people failed today, and like you look around, you're thinking, wow, like that would make me feel more secure to know that I'm not the only one um, winning and losing battles every single day, but especially losing. So I think that's very important. Um, Pat, what about you?
Oh, I have thoughts on DNFs. I agree with everything that everybody has said, so I'm not going to necessarily echo everything of, definitely sit with your feelings, definitely acknowledge them, allow yourself to feel sad. Sadness is okay. Anger is okay. Grief is okay. Feel them, allow them, sit with them. The other thing, I guess the other aspect the other two little aspects is, one is what I hope is happening in the endurance community, sorry, not the committee, but the endurance community is that DNFs are more acceptable, because I used to do Ironman, and, in my team, around my friends, in the Ironman community, it was the kind of saying was death before DNF. Mm-hmm. And I believed that for a while. I would push my body further than it needed to go and ended up getting me really, really, really sick. And so now I want to encourage people to look at DNFs as an option. So when you're out there in the middle of the race course and you're having one of those dark moments, there's a whole process of going through this. But one of the things is looking at what your options are. One option when I'm out there on a bike course, I can have a hit of my drink. I can eat something. Maybe I'll slow down. I'm going to stop at the next aid station. But one of the options is I can get off my bike and call my wife and have her pick me up. And it is a real option. And we need to be able to talk about that as an option. So that's one aspect of that. DNFs are always on the table. Might not like it, but they're always on the table. And then the second is that when we have a DNF, and believe me, I've had my fair share. Part of it is the reflection, part of it is learning, part of it is doing an analysis of saying, okay, where could I have made a change in here that would have led to maybe not DNFing? But then part of that is taking it and learning, which people have also talked about. And in EMDR therapy, we call it future planning, where we're looking at what have we gone through, what have we learned, and now let's envision, let's visualize that next race. Because actually right now, I just the other day, I got an email from an athlete saying, hey, I DNF'd on this race and I'm doing it again coming up soon. And I'm really, really anxious about it. So I think part of it is how do we learn from it? But then how do we metaphorically get back on the horse? How do we help that person get back out there and deal with the anxiety, cope with the nerves, cope with the fear, and plan for a success? Because when we can do the future planning, we can help somebody feel a bit more confident when they get out there.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, those are very good points. And yeah, I think just being able to sit with those emotions and like feel those emotions, but also being able to take that approach to it, it just rounds everything out. And I think that's very important. So, before we jump into our icebreaker question, I want to give everybody the space to let our audience know where they can find you. And I'm going to start with you on this, Pat.
Sure. So since we talked about social media, I'll tell you my social media. I'm on Instagram at Getting Your Mind in Gear. That's also my webpage is Getting Your Mind in Gear. Through my website, you can schedule a free consultation and we can connect and meet. And then I would appreciate all the follows I can on Insta. I'm struggling to figure out how much to post and what to post. You might get some pictures of cats. You might get some motivational mindset Mondays and stuff. Or now you're going to get a picture of a manta ray or two from the diving I did. But please give me a follow.
I want to see those manta ray pictures for sure. I mean, I'm learning how to scuba dive this year, so I'm on that path right now.
Yeah, mantas are awesome, and diving is the best. Like, I highly recommend scuba diving to everybody.
I'm so excited. I'm starting my PADI course very soon. So
awesome, very cool.
Landon, what about you? Where can people find you?
Best place to find me is at Approach Psychology on Instagram. You can also find me at Landon Approach Psych, although I don't use that one quite as much. But if people want to send me messages on there, that sort of thing, I'm available. But yeah, at Approach Psychology is the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Dr. Joanne, what about you?
Sure. So I'm pretty active on Instagram. My handle is at absolute_fitness_performance. And my website is absolutefitnesspsychology.com. But yeah, you can reach me through there.
Awesome. Dr. Aaron, what about you?
Similar Instagram. It's Scotty Sports Psychology, SKADI, and then sport is singular. And then website is often up to date, regular blog posts, things like that. Which www.scottysportspsychology.com. We are most active on Instagram, and we try to post every day. And it's usually kind of educational sports psychology stuff, tips, tricks. And then we also do a decent amount of memes, though we've had a dry spell lately, so we need to step up our meme game.
We need more.
They're like memes specific to endurance athletes, so they're relatable. We need more of the hippo ones. What's his name? That was a fun one. I need to bring that one back.
I'm not going to get too far into memes, but right now I've been seeing the meta AI images of marathoners, and people are going crazy with the ChatGPT meta images of those.
Especially when it's like more. Like, it's just like the really extreme. Like it's entertaining.
It's like more. He's a goo energy god, and he's just like,
yes.
Oh man, my sense of humor is
energy bars.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you everybody for being on the sports psychology panel. But before we let you go, I do have one final question. That's a food related question. So ready or not, here it comes. I'm starting with you, Dr. Aaron. If your approach as a sports psychologist was a meal, what meal would that be?
Oh gosh. That's such a good question. Approach as a sports psychologist. It's definitely not going to be like the perfectly macro balanced nonsense. Great for folks who can do that. I can't. It doesn't fit in my lifestyle or way of being. So honestly, I love a really good cheeseburger and IPA. And it's all about moderation. And so I'm also like, my sports psych is often, I go for the 80% rule for compliance with my training peaks. Like I don't get all of my rides or runs in. And so I feel like a cheeseburger and IPA is kind of along those vibes. Is like nothing wrong with it. And also stick with the good stuff when you need to.
I love that so much. And love the match with the 80-20 rule.
Yes. 20% cheeseburgers and IPA, 80% pancakes.
I feel like that should be the new tagline for Scotty.
Yes.
Process and pancakes.
Process and pancakes. Yes.
Dr. Joanne, what about you?
So the first thing that I went to was like ice cream. I don't know why. I could be hungry. But I was thinking like an ice cream sundae, because when you're getting ice cream, you can put any topping you want on your ice cream sundae and it tastes good to you, but it might not taste good to somebody else. So the way I kind of connect that into, I guess, my consulting and my business is that You have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to, you're everything is for you. Like with athletes I work with, I'm helping them, I'm educating them, but the end goal is for them to become more like in tune with themselves. So I want them to find what they like. There's no perfect modality. So those are the little toppings. Like they may try gummy bears one day and then be like, I don't really like that, I want the M&Ms instead. So maybe they can like pick their toppings, pick their different modalities as we work together. I have no clue if that answered your question, but that's where my head is going.
I love that analogy.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I cannot believe how deep and insightful that was about
That's-
ice cream. It's
Honestly, that's legit.
I think I'm great for it. I think that's why.
and now I want ice cream.
Yeah.
Ice cream. Landon, what about you?
Well, I'd be remiss to say like I'm surrounded by like the best food in Edmonton, where my office is. We're right on like the main strip where like a lot of good culture is. And so like we're lousy with ice cream. I can throw a coin at like 8 different ice cream places that are like all homemade places, but sandwiches are like where it's at. And maybe a little bit what Dr. Joanne was saying, I would say my approach is a sandwich in that, the basics of it are somewhat predictable. And like, we know that there's going to be something soft on the outside with something good in the middle and maybe more soft stuff. We're not quite sure what that skull is going to look like, but we can kind of say like, oh, that's a sandwich. And I just ate a great Cubano down the street at one of the restaurants before this meeting. So that's really in my head. So, the layers of what's needed for that client to individualize that approach. That's what I say. It's going to be a sandwich.
Your sandwich thing made me think about like the way I cook and the way I do things, and it makes me think back to the first thing you said on the show: "Do as I say, not as I do."
Yes.
Pat, what about you?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this as everybody else was talking. I'm like, my God, these people have given brilliant answers. And what I'm thinking of is French toast with Nutella, strawberries, and bananas, which is amazing. And the reason why is I like it, which kind of that's my approach, is to find joy. Like I'm always looking for joy, awe, and wonder. Even in the dark moments, I want somebody to look for what's one thing that sparks a little bit of smile in you right now. And so, yeah, it's French toast with Nutella, strawberries, and bananas, and maybe a little bit of powdered sugar on top. And then have a nice sugar high.
Mm-hmm. And I am going to have a sugar high today after today's Velveeta mac and cheese night. And with the Toll House cookie dough after that. Got to have a couple of those.
Good for you. I had cereal for dinner.
I had Jimmy John's.
Jimmy John's.
Guys and gals, thank you so much for being on the Sports Psychology Roundtable. Really appreciate everybody's insights. All those food answers were amazing. It was just amazing being on this side of the conversation and seeing everybody's similar perspectives. Like I heard a lot of like similar answers, but again, also just answers shaped by your own experiences, your own backgrounds, your own perspectives. And it was just such a fun conversation to be a part of, and really think that this might have to be something we do again. So really appreciate all of you, and to all of you in the Run Try Buck audience, thank you so much for tuning in to the 150th episode. It's a nice round number that's going to change to 151 next week, but we're getting close to 3 years here, and really appreciate all of you and for not only tuning into this show, but our 8 other amazing shows. So thank you so much all, and to everybody, a good night.
Thank you.